I'm Nima Rajan. Canada's new mandatory vaccine policy has been unveiled. It requires all core federal public service, aviation, and rail employees to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by October 29th or be put on unpaid administrative leave. Unvaccinated travelers have a grace period through November, during which they may instead show a negative molecular COVID test before they can board a plane, train, or cruise ship. Well, meanwhile, the Public Service Alliance of Canada is criticizing the federal government's mandatory vaccine policy. The group says it did not properly consult with bargaining agents or incorporate any union feedback prior to the policy. The union, which represents over 160,000 federal workers, sees the policy as rushed. The policy will affect over 267,000 public service and RCMP workers. It will even apply to those who work from home. PSAC also has questions about how the government plans to keep unvaccinated contract workers and visitors out of federal workplaces. Well, all of this comes as the Union for Canadian Correctional Officers says it will push back against the new federal mandatory policy for any of its members that choose not to get a COVID-19 vaccine. Union officials are warning that any challenge could take 2 or 3 years to settle, and there is no court precedent that could predict the outcome. Meanwhile, a legal expert says COVID-19 vaccination mandates in Canadian workplaces could trigger the biggest wave of terminations in this country since the pandemic began. Employment lawyer Lior Samfiru says his firm has been contacted by thousands of unvaccinated workers who are concerned about mandatory vaccination policies. He says if they don't comply, workers could be placed on unpaid leave or fired, but they would be owed compensation. Federal Liberals have picked up another seat in Quebec after a judicial recount. Incumbent Brenda Shanahan will be returning to Parliament in the Liberal minority government. This comes after the recount declared her the winner in Châteauguay-Lacolle by just 12 votes over her Bloc Québécois challenger Patrick O'Hara. That overturns preliminary results just after election night, which had Ms. Shanahan losing by 286 votes. The recount bumps up the total number of seats won by Justin Trudeau's Liberals to 160. The one will sit as an independent. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he is proud of the party's campaign during last month's federal election, but he admits he's also disappointed that more New Democrat MPs weren't elected. He is appointing Bob Dewar, a veteran NDP political strategist, to lead a review into what went right and what went wrong with the party's campaign that netted only one extra seat. 40% of British Columbia's long-term care staff, surveyed by the province's Advocate for Seniors, said they went into work at least once in the past year feeling sick. Seniors advocate Isabel McKenzie released a new report on the subject on Wednesday. It included the expansion and improvement of sick pay benefits for care facility workers as a top recommendation. A tentative contract agreement has been reached between the Manitoba government and the Manitoba Nurses Union. The new deal comes more than 4 years after the last deal expired. The union says it offers nurses wage increases totaling 9.6% over 7 years before compounding. The union's 12,000 members will vote on the tentative agreement online. Meanwhile, operators, workers, and advocates say funding alone won't fix the crisis in Ontario's long-term care homes. The Ontario Long-Term Care Association welcomed news on the situation yesterday. The province intends to spend $270 million to hire more than 4,000 workers before next March. But CEO Donna Duncan says it will take hard work and collaboration to reach the shared goal of increasing hours of direct care for residents during a human resources crisis in the sector. The largest union representing long-term care workers says things won't improve until, quote, abhorrent work conditions are addressed. Quebec's Premier and Health Minister are defending their decision to impose mandatory vaccination for healthcare workers. Opposition Parti Québécois members and some unions are urging Premier François Legault and his CAQ government to delay the deadline to avoid potential service breakdowns. As of last week, 7,000 frontline healthcare workers remained unvaccinated. These workers could face suspension without pay after the government's October 15th deadline. Nova Scotia's highest court has ruled there is systemic discrimination by the provincial government. This is against people with disabilities who are looking for services. The Court of Appeal decision comes as the result of an appeal of a human rights decision. It found 3 people with intellectual disabilities had been discriminated against by being kept in a Halifax psychiatric hospital. The same decision also concluded that there wasn't wider discrimination in how housing and supports were provided by the state to people with disabilities. All right, we'll be right back. We'll have our weekly market update with Catherine Murray, the host of The Buck Stops Here up next. That and, of course, more news from around the world. So stay with us. We'll be back after a short break. All right, welcome back. We turn now to our weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, once again, we're talking about the same thing. These markets continued to be very volatile, and in fact, this week, really getting whipsawed. The markets were down at the beginning of the week, and right now are seeing a sharp rally. We'll get to that in just a second. But it seems as though investors continue to be very concerned about the U.S. Federal Reserve pulling back their bond buying program, which is leading to the U.S. 10-year yield moving above that 1.5% mark. Not a big deal, but it is shaking off investor confidence a little bit. And of course, the inflation effects that we're seeing in very real terms, specifically driven by the price of oil. Having said that, and those concerns, we are seeing that sharp rally. In fact, it's the biggest rally or rebound turnaround since the prior day's close that we've seen since February. Now, why is that happening? It is because it seems as though the politicians in Washington, D.C. were able to kick the can down the road once again as it relates to a debt ceiling and reaching a deal. So that is perhaps one of the key reasons for the move higher today. But also there are some investors and strategists saying that we were perhaps in an oversold situation, seeing as the markets have been down 1% to 2% day after day. Having said that as well, a couple of thoughts when we think about the market. It is very undecided right now between the bulls and the bears. The bears saying that we are entering earnings season and we will see peak earnings, peak growth that is. However, the bulls will say that that the market is underappreciating the strength and the resiliency of the companies when they do report their numbers. We will get those corporate earnings results over the next couple of weeks. So beware that we will see those results and that they could be volatile between now and then. And when we really hear about the company management's thoughts on inflation and how they're faring with it. Away from that as well, we are keeping our eyes on the price of crude oil. It did hit a 7-year high this week. That is leading to some significant strength in the energy sector as well as the stocks if you own any of them. And importantly as well, we're seeing a bit of a rebound or a reverse of the earlier declines in today's session on the back of the Energy Department saying that there are no plans to tap the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the United States. So you're seeing a nice uptick in the price of WTI once again today. Away from that, when we think about the TSX, we've certainly seen a nice move higher in the TSX yesterday as well as today. Interesting as well, when we think about the energy sector, and there has been just so much focus on the energy sector, there have been so many strategists and investors that have been late to the party. You are now seeing more analysts upgrade their stocks. Morgan Stanley, for one, initiating on Suncor with an outperform and a $38 price target. Also Cenovus, Morgan Stanley initiating with a outperformer overweight and a $18 price target. Also keep in mind that we're keeping our eyes on the economic data. It has been a little bit weak as of late, pretty much across the board, across the globe, but we are seeing a bit of a pickup in some small aspects. So watch that as well in terms of how it affects market sentiment, investor sentiment, and where we go from here. But do expect some volatility over the next couple of weeks until we get a good read on corporate earnings. And that does it for me. I'm Catherine Murray. Nima, back to you.
Lots to keep our eyes on, Catherine. Thanks for that. All right, a group representing thousands of small businesses countrywide says its members are increasingly sour on their financial prospects. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business says sentiment in its monthly barometer for September showed the largest one-month drop since the onset of the pandemic in March 2020. The group says there has been a drop in the short-term expectations for companies in the hospitality and construction industries. This while retail and agriculture saw the deepest dive on their outlook for the next year. The organization is asking the federal government to extend wage and rent supplements. Canada is giving China the cold shoulder over its interest in joining an 11-country Pacific Rim trading bloc. The bloc is viewed as an important gateway to diversifying Canadian trade with other Asian countries. A spokesman for International Trade Minister Mary Ng says Canada is aware of China's desire to join the comprehensive and progressive agreement on Trans-Pacific Partnership. Chris Zhao says China will only be permitted entry into the CPTPP if it meets the high standard required by member countries. Trade analysts say Canada should vocally oppose China's entry to the trade pact, especially given the return of the two Michaels. All right, we'll be right back with a look at rising taxes and gas prices. We'll have an interview with Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, up next. That and, of course, more news from around the world after a short break, so stay with us.
My name is Tanya Granick-Allen, and I'm the host of a new show here on the Newsforum Network called Counterpoint. We're going to be talking about all sorts of issues that affect you, Canadians. We're going to want to hear from you whether you're on the right, the left, or the center. You can catch my show at 8:30 p.m. or 12:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday, right here on the Newsforum Network.
The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is speaking out against rising gas taxes. This as the price at the pumps continues to increase. The organization is pointing out that more than a third of the price of gas is actually made up of taxes in many provinces, claiming that Canadians have to pay taxes upon taxes when they fill their tanks. The CTF says the federal carbon tax will only continue to make this situation worse by 2030, when the carbon tax is set to cost about 40 cents per liter of gasoline. This comes as crude oil prices are up nearly 63% this year, while natural gas is 2.5 times higher. Well, joining us now to talk more on this is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, the Federal Director at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So let's start with why the CTF is speaking out on taxes at the pumps in the first place.
Well, drivers are feeling the pain of these high prices, and it's high taxes that make these high gas prices even more painful. And in many provinces, you have taxes that make up more than a third of the price of gas. So if politicians really care about affordability, they would be providing tax relief. But unfortunately, we're seeing the Trudeau government move in the opposite and wrong direction with its massively increasing carbon tax, which is going to take these already big tax bills at the pumps and make it even bigger.
All right, sir. Well, as you mentioned, more than a third of the price of gas is in taxes in some provinces. So what provinces are these?
That's correct. Newfoundland and Labrador, Quebec, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia.
And out of all of these provinces, sir, which ones charge the most in Canada when it comes to carbon taxes on gasoline?
Well, you actually have to look at cities, and it's the city of Montreal where that's the case, where 42% of the pump price can be in taxes. And, we have to feel bad for our friends in Montreal who are drivers because they are paying 6 different types of taxes when they fuel up.
Wow. Well, in addition to this, the CTF is saying that Canadians have to pay taxes on top of taxes at the pumps. So tell us a little bit more about this additional tax.
Yeah, it's extremely unfair. And that happens because the federal government and some provincial governments are charging a sales tax on top of these per liter fuel taxes. It's completely unfair. And what that really means today is that when we see these higher gas prices, when we see fuel taxes increase, it means that tax on tax costs Canadians more.
And meanwhile, this carbon tax is only set to increase. So how much more could the average Canadian family spend on carbon taxes at the pumps by 2030?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that the Trudeau government is going to make life less affordable for Canadians with its massively increasing carbon tax, punishing Canadians for fueling our cars and heating our homes during cold winter months. And Trudeau's carbon tax by 2030 will cost about 40 cents per liter for gasoline.
All right, sir. And you mentioned in a release that Ottawa is implementing a second carbon tax. So tell us more on this and how this would impact the overall cost of gas moving forward.
Yeah, to add insult to injury, the Trudeau government announced its intentions to impose what amounts to be a second carbon tax through fuel regulations. Now, producers will be required to reduce the carbon content of their fuels, but if they can't meet Trudeau's requirements, they'll have to pay his second carbon tax. But it's not just going to be big industry that pays that second carbon tax. Those costs are going to be felt by everyday Canadians at the pumps. Trudeau's second carbon tax could end up costing up to 11 cents per liter of gasoline. Now, that means that Trudeau's 2 carbon taxes would end up soaking a family for nearly $40 every time they fill up their minivan in 2030.
All right, sir, just about a minute and a half left here, but let's talk about solutions. What is the CTF calling on the government to do in order to improve affordability and prices at gas stations?
Well, if politicians, provincial and federal, if they really care about improving affordability for Canadians and drivers, then they're going to have to provide tax relief at the pump. That means reducing their fuel taxes and scrapping the damaging federal carbon tax.
All right, sir, just about a minute left here, but is there anything that our Canadian viewers can do to get involved in this initiative?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, you have to contact your provincial politicians. You have to contact your federal politician and tell them that enough is enough. Stop with these rising tax bills at the pumps. But please also go to taxpayer.com, check out our newsroom for much more resources, and also check out our latest Gas Tax Honesty Day report.
All right, Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Always great having you on Forum Daily, sir. Thank you again for your time today.
Well, thanks for having me on.
All right, stay tuned. We'll be back after the break with a look at stories from around the world. A judge has temporarily blocked an abortion bill in Texas. The European Union recommends relief funds for consumers hit hardest by soaring energy prices. And Ethiopia accuses UN officials of worsening the humanitarian crisis in the Tigray region. These stories and more when we come back after the break, so stay with us. More news after the break. Texas has been ordered to suspend its new abortion law. The order Wednesday by U.S. District Judge Robert Pittman freezes the abortion law known as Senate Bill 8. It bans abortions once cardiac activity is detected, which is usually around 6 weeks. That is before some women even know they're pregnant. The decision is the first legal blow to the Texas law since the U.S. Supreme Court allowed it to take effect last month. Court documents unsealed earlier today accuse an Alaska man of threatening to hire an assassin to kill U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski. In a separate threat, police say a caller allegedly left a voice message at Ms. Murkowski's Washington office. It was asking if the Republican knew what a .5 caliber shell does to a human head. The first appearance for suspect J. Allen Johnson over allegedly making threats against 2 senators will continue until Friday. The European Union is urging member countries to provide relief funds to consumers and small businesses hit hardest by rising gas and electricity prices. The suggestion comes amid criticism that the bloc's climate change fighting policies are fueling the problem. Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson said Wednesday that providing targeted support to consumers, direct payments to those most at risk of energy poverty, cutting energy taxes, and shifting charges to general taxation are all measures that can be taken very swiftly under EU rules. Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz is denying wrongdoing and vowing to remain the country's leader. This despite being under investigation in a probe of suspected bribery. Anti-corruption prosecutors said on Wednesday they are conducting an investigation into Mr. Kurz and 9 other people. This, as well as 3 organizations it didn't name, on suspicion of breach of trust and bribery. The case centers on allegations around the use of finance ministry money. They claim it was used to pay for manipulated polls that were published in a newspaper without being declared as advertising. The military leader of Guinea has announced that senior international civil servant Mohamed Bibagui will serve as prime minister. This in a government that is transitioning the West African nation to civilian rule after last month's coup. Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, who was sworn in as interim president on Friday, announced Mr. Bivagui's new position. Mr. Bibagui is 68 and has a notable career in development, and much of it in the United Nations. A group of French senators visiting Taiwan met with President Tsai Ing-wen. The trip comes amid heightened tensions between Taiwan and China. President Tsai gave Senator Alain Richard an official distinction recognizing his contributions to Taiwan-France relations. China has recently stepped up military, diplomatic, and economic pressure, sending a record number of fighter jets toward the island. Well, meanwhile, Greece's lawmakers are debating and voting on a broad 5-year defense pact signed last week with France. It includes a clause of mutual assistance in case of attack by a third party. Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis signed the deal with French President Emmanuel Macron during a September 28th visit to Paris. Greece also announced it would be buying 3 French frigates for the Greek Navy. This comes amid increased tensions between Greece and NATO member Turkey over energy exploration rights in the Eastern Mediterranean. Days after kicking out 7 UN officials, Ethiopia is accusing them, without providing evidence, of inflating the magnitude of the humanitarian crisis in the Tigray region. The Ethiopian ambassador said the officials boosted the number of needy people by over 1 million. He also says they caused over a dozen deaths in a camp for displaced people, among other allegations. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres asked the ambassador to provide written proof and says Ethiopia had no right to expel the officials under the UN Charter. Iraq has signed a contract with a United Arab Emirates-based renewable energy developer. This is to build 5 solar power plants in the oil-rich country with a chronic energy problem. Iraq hopes the agreement would help mitigate its energy supply gap. The country is a major oil producer with plentiful energy resources. Still, Iraq suffers daily power outages due to rampant corruption, an aging grid, and other technical issues. General Motors has announced plans to cash in as the world switches from combustion engines to battery power. It's promising to double its annual revenue by 2030. This with an array of new electric vehicles, profitable gas-powered cars and trucks, and services. This includes an electronic driving system that can handle most functions on the road. Canada's Walk of Fame is set to expand when it holds its Toronto Gala on December 4th. Among this year's inductees are actors Keanu Reeves and Graham Greene, retired Lieutenant General and Senator Romeo Dallaire, and musician Bruce Cockburn. Also on the list are singer-songwriter Julie Black, late blues artist Salome Bay, wrestling star Bret the Hitman Hart, Olympic champion decathlete Damian Warner, and cargo jet CEO Ajay Virmani. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily News.